Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that a Columbus, Division of Police, CPD officer, responding to an anonymous tip about potential drug activity at a private residence, believes there is probable cause to search the premises for evidence. The officer has not yet spoken to the resident or conducted further independent investigation to corroborate the tip. Which of the following actions best adheres to the jurisdictional requirements and professional standards for the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD? Option A. Obtain a search warrant from a judge based on the information gathered, presenting the facts supporting probable cause. Option B. Secure the perimeter of the residence and wait for the resident to exit before attempting to question them without seeking a warrant. Option C. Immediately enter the residence to search for evidence, citing the anonymous tip as sufficient justification. Option D. Conduct a warrantless search of the residence, based on the officer's belief that evidence is likely present. The correct answer is A. Obtain a search warrant from a judge based on the information gathered, presenting the facts supporting probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering during an investigation and the strict adherence to established legal procedures and individual rights. Officers must balance their duty to investigate potential criminal activity with the constitutional protections afforded to all citizens, particularly regarding search and seizure. Misjudging the scope of authority or the proper application of legal standards can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, damage to the investigation's integrity, and potential civil liability for the officer and the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause before conducting a search of a private residence. This approach aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. The Columbus, Division of Police, CPD, operates under this constitutional mandate. A warrant signifies that a neutral and detached magistrate has reviewed the evidence presented by law enforcement and determined that probable cause exists to believe that evidence of a crime will be found at the specified location. This process ensures that searches are not arbitrary but are based on specific, articulable facts, thereby safeguarding citizens' privacy rights while allowing for legitimate law enforcement investigations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Conducting a search of the residence without a warrant, even with the belief that evidence is present, violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. This approach disregards the requirement for judicial oversight and probable cause determination by a magistrate. The Columbus, Division of Police, CPD, is bound by these constitutional limitations, and evidence obtained through such an unlawful search would likely be inadmissible in court under the exclusionary rule. Relying solely on the neighbor's anonymous tip as justification for a warrantless search is insufficient. While tips can be a starting point for an investigation, they generally do not, by themselves, establish probable cause for a search of a private residence. The information needs to be corroborated through independent investigation to meet the constitutional standard. The CPD must follow established protocols for verifying anonymous tips before taking intrusive actions. Entering the residence to secure the scene without exigent circumstances or a warrant is also an improper approach. While officers may enter a residence under specific exigent circumstances, e.g., immediate danger to life, destruction of evidence, the mere belief that evidence might be present does not automatically create such an exigency. This action bypasses the constitutional requirement for a warrant and could be deemed an unlawful entry and search. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement, including officers of the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD, must employ a decision-making process that prioritizes constitutional rights and established legal procedures. When faced with a situation potentially involving criminal activity within a private residence, the primary consideration should be whether probable cause exists to seek a search warrant. If probable cause is established through credible information and investigation, the next step is to obtain a warrant from a judge. If exigent circumstances are demonstrably present, officers may be justified in taking immediate action, but this exception is narrowly defined and requires strong justification. In all other situations, respecting the sanctity of the home and the protections of the Fourth Amendment is paramount. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates that during a traffic stop in Columbus, Ohio, an officer develops a hunch that the driver may be concealing contraband. The officer has no specific articulable facts to support this hunch, but wishes to search the vehicle. Which of the following actions best adheres to the legal and ethical standards governing law enforcement in Ohio? Option A. The officer informs the driver that they have a right to refuse the search and asks for their voluntary consent to search the vehicle. Option B. The officer tells the driver, "You have to let me search your car because I'm a police officer," and then searches. Option C. The officer conducts a search of the vehicle based solely on their gut feeling without any further justification. Option D. The officer states, "I have a feeling you're hiding something, so I'm going to search your car," and proceeds to search. The correct answer is A. The officer informs the driver that they have a right to refuse the search and asks for their voluntary consent to search the vehicle. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal rights of an individual during an interaction. The officer must act within the bounds of the Ohio Revised Code and departmental policy regarding searches and seizures, while also considering the safety of the public and themselves. Misinterpreting the scope of permissible actions can lead to legal repercussions for the officer and the department, as well as compromise the integrity of any evidence obtained. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly articulating the probable cause for the search to the individual, informing them of their right to refuse the search, and obtaining explicit consent before proceeding. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court in cases like Miranda v. Arizona and subsequent rulings on consent searches. In Ohio, this is further reinforced by the Ohio Revised Code, which generally requires probable cause for a warrantless search or voluntary and intelligent consent. By informing the individual of their rights and seeking consent, the officer respects the individual's autonomy and ensures the search is conducted legally, making any evidence admissible. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer implying that the individual has no choice but to allow the search, perhaps by stating, "I'm going to search your car anyway." This constitutes coercion and negates the voluntariness of any subsequent consent, violating the principles of consent searches and potentially the Fourth Amendment. Evidence obtained would likely be suppressed. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to proceed with a search based solely on a hunch or a vague feeling of suspicion, without articulating specific, articulable facts that rise to the level of probable cause. This bypasses the legal standard required for a warrantless search under Ohio law and the U.S. Constitution, rendering the search unlawful and any evidence inadmissible. A third incorrect approach is for the officer to conduct a search without informing the individual of their right to refuse consent, even if the individual appears to acquiesce. While acquiescence might seem like consent, true consent must be voluntary and informed. Failing to inform the individual of their right to refuse consent undermines the voluntariness of their agreement and can be interpreted as implied coercion, leading to the suppression of evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves 1. Assessing the situation for articulable facts that support probable cause or reasonable suspicion. 2. Understanding the specific legal parameters for searches and seizures under the Ohio Revised Code and relevant case law. 3. Communicating clearly and respectfully with individuals, informing them of their rights when applicable. 4. Obtaining explicit, voluntary, and informed consent for searches when probable cause is lacking or to expand the scope of a search. 5. Documenting all interactions and justifications for actions taken. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates that Columbus, Division of Police officer observes a vehicle being operated by an individual with whom they have a close personal friendship. The officer is aware of this individual's history of minor traffic violations. Considering the ethical guidelines and operational procedures of the Columbus, Division of Police, what is the most appropriate course of action for the officer regarding this observation? Option A. Discreetly avoid making eye contact with the individual and continue on patrol without taking any official action. Option B. Conduct the traffic stop as normal, but make a mental note to be lenient with any violations observed due to the personal connection. Option C. Proceed with a traffic stop, assuming personal objectivity will prevent any bias, and address the relationship only if directly questioned. Option D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to a supervisor and await further instructions on how to proceed, if at all. Correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to a supervisor and await further instructions on how to proceed, if at all. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining public trust and ensuring the efficient operation of law enforcement. Officers are entrusted with significant authority, and their actions, even when seemingly minor, can have a profound impact on community relations and the integrity of the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD. The need for clear, consistent, and ethical conduct is paramount, as outlined in CPD's internal policies and Ohio law. The best professional practice involves a proactive and transparent approach to addressing potential conflicts of interest. This means immediately disclosing any personal relationship that could reasonably be perceived as influencing official duties. This approach is correct because it aligns with CPD's ethical guidelines and the Ohio Revised Code concerning public officials' conduct, which emphasize avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. By disclosing the relationship, the officer demonstrates integrity and allows for appropriate management to ensure impartiality in any future interactions with the individual. This upholds the principle of accountability and reinforces public confidence in the CPD. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the traffic stop without any disclosure, assuming personal objectivity. This fails to acknowledge the potential for unconscious bias or the perception of favoritism by the public or other officers. It violates CPD's ethical standards by not proactively managing a potential conflict of interest and could lead to accusations of preferential treatment, undermining the department's credibility. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the relationship after the stop is completed, perhaps if questioned. This is problematic because it suggests a lack of commitment to transparency and a willingness to operate in a gray area. It misses the opportunity for preventative management and could still create an appearance of impropriety if the relationship becomes known later. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to avoid the stop altogether due to the relationship. While seemingly intended to avoid conflict, this can also be problematic. It could be interpreted as shirking duty or allowing personal connections to interfere with the enforcement of traffic laws, which is a dereliction of the officer's responsibilities and could also lead to perceptions of favoritism or unequal application of the law. The professional reasoning process for officers in similar situations should involve a constant self-assessment of potential conflicts of interest. When a situation arises where a personal relationship might influence or appear to influence official duties, the immediate and best course of action is to disclose the relationship to a supervisor. This allows for informed decision-making regarding the officer's involvement, ensuring impartiality and maintaining the integrity of the CPD. Question 4. System analysis indicates that Columbus, Division of Police, CPD, officer is responding to a report of a recent burglary. Upon arrival, the officer observes an individual matching the suspect's description attempting to flee the scene. The officer detains the individual and, before asking any questions about their presence or involvement in the burglary, needs to determine the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure the investigation proceeds legally and ethically under Ohio law. Option A. Search the individual for any evidence of the burglary and then, if nothing is found, proceed to question them without issuing a Miranda warning. Option B. Immediately inform the individual of their Miranda rights and then proceed with questioning regarding their presence and potential involvement in the burglary. Option C. Transport the individual to the police station and then issue the Miranda warning before any questioning begins. Option D. Detain the individual and question them extensively about their involvement in the burglary to gather immediate information before considering the Miranda warning. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the individual of their Miranda rights and then proceed with questioning regarding their presence and potential involvement in the burglary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Columbus, Division of Police, CPD officers, balancing the need for immediate information gathering with the constitutional rights of individuals encountered during an investigation. The officer must act swiftly, but also within the bounds of established legal precedent and departmental policy to ensure any evidence obtained is admissible and that the individual's rights are not violated. The pressure of a potential ongoing crime and the desire to apprehend a suspect can lead to hasty decisions that could compromise the investigation or lead to legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and the individual while immediately initiating the Miranda warning process. This approach prioritizes the protection of the individual's constitutional rights against self-incrimination, as guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and further clarified by Miranda v. Arizona. By providing the warning before any custodial interrogation, the officer ensures that any subsequent statements made by the individual are voluntary and admissible in court. This aligns with CPD policy and Ohio law regarding custodial interrogations, which mandate that individuals in custody must be informed of their rights before questioning. This proactive approach safeguards the integrity of the investigation and the officer's actions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Detaining the individual and questioning them extensively about their involvement in the alleged crime without first issuing a Miranda warning is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This constitutes custodial interrogation without proper notification of rights, rendering any statements obtained potentially inadmissible in court due to a violation of the Fifth Amendment. It also exposes the officer and the CPD to potential civil liability. Waiting to issue the Miranda warning until after the individual has been transported to the station and further questioning has occurred is also a failure. Timing of the warning is critical. It must precede any custodial interrogation. Delaying the warning allows for potentially coerced statements to be made, undermining the voluntariness of the confession and violating established legal standards. Focusing solely on searching the individual for contraband or evidence of the crime, without addressing the Miranda warning before any questioning about their involvement, is an incomplete and potentially flawed approach. While a lawful search incident to arrest or based on probable cause may be permissible, questioning the individual about the crime itself without the Miranda warning remains a violation of their rights, even if contraband is found. The primary focus must be on respecting constitutional rights during any interaction that could be construed as custodial interrogation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal compliance. This involves a thorough understanding of the Miranda warning requirements and their application in various scenarios. When an individual is in custody and subject to interrogation, the immediate and accurate issuance of the Miranda warning is paramount. Officers should be trained to recognize the point at which an interaction becomes custodial and triggers the need for the warning. Furthermore, they must understand the consequences of failing to comply, which can include the suppression of evidence and disciplinary action. A proactive approach that respects individual rights while diligently pursuing justice is the hallmark of professional conduct. Question 5. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in average response times for domestic disturbance calls within the Columbus, O. Division of Police, CPD, jurisdiction over the past 6 months. Considering the critical nature of these calls, which of the following actions represents the most effective and professionally responsible course of action for the CPD to address this trend? Option A. Implement a policy that assigns blame for response time delays to individual officers based on their patrol sector without further investigation. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of dispatch protocols, officer deployment patterns, and call prioritization systems to identify specific operational inefficiencies contributing to the increased response times. Option C. Immediately request additional funding to hire more patrol officers to increase the overall number of units available for dispatch. Option D. Maintain current operational procedures, assuming the increase in response times is a temporary anomaly and will resolve itself. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of dispatch protocols, officer deployment patterns, and call prioritization systems to identify specific operational inefficiencies contributing to the increased response times. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in response times for domestic disturbance calls within the Columbus, O. Division of Police, CPD jurisdiction. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public safety and the effectiveness of police services. Delays in responding to domestic disturbances can escalate violence, endanger victims, and compromise the ability of officers to intervene effectively. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes of these delays and implement appropriate solutions that align with CPD's mission and the legal obligations of law enforcement in Ohio. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of dispatch protocols and officer deployment strategies. This includes analyzing call prioritization, officer availability, geographical patrol zones, and the impact of non-emergency calls on response times. By identifying specific bottlenecks and inefficiencies within the existing system, CPD can develop targeted interventions. This approach is correct because it is data-driven, proactive, and directly addresses the operational aspects of response time management, aligning with the CPD's commitment to efficient and effective public service, as mandated by Ohio law and departmental policy, which emphasizes timely and appropriate response to all calls for service. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of officers without analyzing current deployment or dispatch efficiency is incorrect. This is because simply adding more personnel may not address underlying systemic issues and could lead to inefficient resource allocation, failing to improve response times where they are most needed. It also ignores the potential for optimizing existing resources. Another incorrect approach would be to blame individual officers for delays without a thorough investigation into systemic factors. This is ethically unsound and professionally damaging, as it fails to acknowledge potential issues with dispatch, equipment, or workload distribution. It can lead to low morale and a lack of trust within the department, hindering collaborative problem solving. Finally, an approach that involves ignoring the performance metrics and continuing with current practices is unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a disregard for the potential harm caused by delayed responses. It violates the ethical duty of law enforcement to protect and serve the community effectively, and is contrary to the principles of continuous improvement expected of public service organizations in Ohio. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with data analysis to understand the problem's scope and nature. This should be followed by identifying potential causes, brainstorming solutions, evaluating the feasibility and impact of each solution, and then implementing the most effective strategies. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are crucial to ensure the chosen solutions are achieving the desired outcomes and to make necessary adjustments. Question 6. System analysis indicates that Columbus, Division of Police officer arrives at a residence following a 911 call reporting a loud argument and sounds of distress. Upon arrival, the officer observes two individuals, a male and a female, standing in the doorway, appearing agitated but not physically injured. The male states the female is overreacting, while the female claims the male threatened her. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer to take to ensure safety and gather accurate information? Option A. Take the male into custody based on the female's statement, as threats are a serious matter. Option B. Immediately enter the residence and physically separate the individuals to prevent any further escalation. Option C. Dismiss the complaint as a verbal dispute and leave the scene without further investigation. As no visible injuries are present, Option D. Maintain a safe distance. Use a calm and authoritative tone, and attempt to speak with each individual separately to obtain their individual accounts of the incident. The correct answer is D. Maintain a safe distance. Use a calm and authoritative tone, and attempt to speak with each individual separately to obtain their individual accounts of the incident. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Columbus, Ohio, involving the potential for a domestic dispute to escalate and the need to balance immediate safety concerns with the rights of individuals involved. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, determine the appropriate level of intervention, and ensure actions are consistent with Ohio Revised Code and Columbus Division of Police policies. The professional challenge lies in de-escalating the situation, gathering accurate information from potentially unreliable sources, and acting decisively without infringing on constitutional rights or departmental procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach to de-escalation and information gathering. This includes maintaining a safe distance, using a calm and authoritative tone, and attempting to speak with each party separately to obtain their individual accounts of the incident. This approach is correct because it prioritizes officer safety and the safety of those involved by creating space for assessment. Separately interviewing individuals allows for more objective understanding of events, reducing the influence of immediate emotional responses or attempts to manipulate the narrative. This aligns with the principles of effective communication and evidence gathering, crucial for determining if a crime has occurred and what action, if any, is warranted under Ohio law, such as potential charges for domestic violence or disorderly conduct. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately entering the residence and attempting to physically separate the individuals without a clear indication of immediate danger or a lawful basis to enter. This could violate the Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures if there is no probable cause or exigent circumstances. It also risks escalating the situation unnecessarily and could lead to an officer being injured or causing injury to a resident. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the complaint outright based on the initial appearance of calm, without attempting to gather more information. This fails to acknowledge that domestic disputes can be volatile and that initial appearances can be deceiving. It could leave victims in a dangerous situation and violate the duty of care expected of CPD officers to investigate potential criminal activity. A third incorrect approach is to take sides based on initial impressions or the perceived demeanor of one party, without conducting a thorough and impartial investigation. This is ethically unsound and could lead to an unjust outcome, potentially resulting in the arrest of an innocent party or failure to address a genuine threat. It undermines the principle of equal protection under the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and fairness. This involves 1. Scene assessment. Immediately assess the safety of the environment for all parties, including officers. 2. De-escalation. Utilize communication techniques to reduce tension and create an environment conducive to information gathering. 3. Information gathering. Systematically collect facts from all involved parties and any witnesses, seeking corroboration where possible. 4. Legal analysis. Determine if any Ohio laws have been violated based on the gathered evidence. 5. Action. Take appropriate action based on the legal analysis, which may include arrest, referral for services, or documentation of the incident, always adhering to CPD policy and constitutional mandates. Question 7. Process analysis reveals that during a lawful search of a residence in Columbus, Ohio, related to an ongoing narcotics investigation, a CPD officer discovers a significant quantity of financial records, including bank statements and transaction logs, that appear to be unrelated to the primary objective of the search, but may indicate potential money laundering activities. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the officer to take regarding these financial records? Option A. Discuss the details of the financial records and their potential implications with a family member who works in the financial sector. Option B. Meticulously document the discovery of the financial records in the official incident report, clearly noting their relevance to the ongoing investigation, and immediately submit them to the evidence custodian in accordance with CPD's evidence handling protocols. Option C. Keep the financial records in the officer's personal locker for safekeeping until the primary investigation is concluded, then decide how to proceed. Option D. Inform a fellow CPD officer who is not directly assigned to this investigation about the contents of the financial records to get their opinion on their significance. The correct answer is B. Meticulously document the discovery of the financial records in the official incident report, clearly noting their relevance to the ongoing investigation, and immediately submit them to the evidence custodian in accordance with CPD's evidence handling protocols. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Columbus, Division of Police CPD officer due to the sensitive nature of information obtained during an investigation and the potential for misuse or unauthorized disclosure. Maintaining public trust and adhering to departmental policies regarding evidence handling and information dissemination are paramount. The officer must balance the need to conduct thorough investigations with the strict requirements for safeguarding sensitive data. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the discovery of the financial records in the official incident report, clearly noting their relevance to the ongoing investigation, and immediately submitting them to the evidence custodian in accordance with CPD's evidence handling protocols. This approach ensures that the financial records are properly logged, secured, and accounted for, preventing any unauthorized access or tampering. This aligns with CPD's general orders and Ohio revised code provisions concerning the chain of custody and the integrity of evidence, which are critical for maintaining the admissibility of evidence in court and upholding due process. Incorrect approach is analysis. Disclosing the contents of the financial records to a colleague not directly involved in the investigation, even if they are a fellow CPD officer, constitutes a breach of confidentiality and potentially violates CPD's general orders on information security and privacy. This action risks prejudicing the investigation, compromising the integrity of the evidence, and eroding public trust. Retaining the financial records in the officer's personal locker without formally logging them as evidence is a severe violation of CPD's evidence handling procedures. This creates a gap in the chain of custody, making the evidence vulnerable to loss, alteration, or destruction, and could lead to its suppression in any subsequent legal proceedings. It also demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and accountability. Sharing details about the financial records and their potential implications with a family member, regardless of their profession, is an egregious breach of confidentiality and professional ethics. This exposes sensitive investigative information to individuals outside the scope of the investigation and CPD, undermining the integrity of the investigation and potentially jeopardizing the safety of individuals involved. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established departmental policies and legal statutes. This involves a clear understanding of evidence handling procedures, confidentiality requirements, and the chain of custody. When encountering sensitive information or evidence, the immediate and correct course of action is to follow protocol for documentation and secure transfer to the designated evidence custodian. Any deviation from these established procedures should be avoided, and officers should err on the side of caution by consulting with supervisors or the evidence unit if unsure about the proper handling of any item. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates a need to evaluate officer responses to the discovery of a suspicious package during a routine traffic stop in Columbus, Ohio. An officer has lawfully stopped a vehicle for a minor traffic violation. During the stop, the officer observes, in plain view on the passenger seat, a clear plastic bag containing a white powdery substance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Columbus O Division of Police officer in this situation? Option A. Ignore the suspicious package to avoid escalating the traffic stop and focus solely on issuing the citation for the original traffic violation. Option B. Secure the vehicle and its contents, observe and document the substance in plain view, and then seek legal authorization, e.g., warrant or consent, to further investigate or seize the substance if necessary, ensuring the safety of all parties involved. Option C. Immediately search the entire passenger compartment of the vehicle for additional contraband, based on the discovery of the suspicious substance. Option D. Detain the driver and passengers for an extended period to conduct a thorough, warrantless search of the vehicle's trunk and any containers within it. Correct answer is B. Secure the vehicle and its contents, observe and document the substance in plain view, and then seek legal authorization, e.g., warrant or consent, to further investigate or seize the substance if necessary, ensuring the safety of all parties involved. Explanation. Operational review demonstrates a need to assess how Columbus O Division of Police, CPD, officers handle situations involving potential evidence discovery during routine traffic stops. This scenario is professionally challenging because officers must balance the immediate need to address the traffic violation with the critical responsibility of preserving potential evidence for criminal investigations, all while adhering to constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. The rapid nature of traffic stops and the potential for evidence to be transient or easily destroyed necessitate swift, yet legally sound, decision-making. The best professional practice involves a measured approach that prioritizes the safety of the officer and the public, followed by a thorough assessment of the situation for probable cause. This approach, which involves securing the scene, observing and documenting any visible evidence, and then seeking appropriate legal authorization, such as a warrant or consent, if further search is required beyond plain view, is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and established Ohio case law regarding searches incident to arrest and probable cause. This method ensures that any evidence obtained is admissible in court and that individual rights are respected. An incorrect approach would be to immediately search the entire vehicle without any articulable suspicion beyond the initial traffic infraction. This fails to respect the constitutional limits on searches and seizures, potentially leading to the suppression of evidence and civil liability for the officer and the division. Another incorrect approach is to ignore potential evidence that is in plain view, as this would constitute a failure to uphold the duty to investigate and preserve evidence, potentially hindering a criminal investigation. Finally, delaying the stop unnecessarily to gather information not directly related to the traffic violation or the discovery of evidence could also be problematic, as it could infringe on the individual's rights if the stop is prolonged without justification. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with officer safety, followed by a clear articulation of the legal basis for any actions taken. This involves understanding the nuances of probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and the exceptions to the warrant requirement. When evidence is discovered, officers should document its location and appearance meticulously and consult with supervisors or legal advisors when in doubt about the legality of a search or seizure. Question 9. System analysis indicates that Columbus, Division of Police officer has detained an individual suspected of a crime. The individual, clearly distressed, makes a statement about their involvement. The officer has not yet read the individual their Miranda rights. Which of the following actions best upholds the legal and ethical standards for law enforcement in Ohio? Option A. Continue questioning the individual to gather more details about their statement, as the statement was made voluntarily. Option B. Proceed with questioning, assuming the individual understands their rights because they made a statement. Option C. Ask the individual if they want to talk to a lawyer before continuing the conversation, without explicitly reading them their Miranda rights. Option D. Immediately cease all questioning and ensure the individual is fully informed of their Miranda rights before any further interaction. Correct answer is D. Immediately cease all questioning and ensure the individual is fully informed of their Miranda rights before any further interaction. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Columbus, Division of Police, CPD officers, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect an individual's rights. The professional challenge lies in discerning when an individual's statements, made under duress or without full understanding of their rights, can be used as evidence, and how to proceed to ensure any subsequent information gathered is admissible and ethically obtained. This requires a deep understanding of the Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination and the procedural safeguards established by Miranda v. Arizona, as interpreted and applied within Ohio law. The best professional practice involves immediately ceasing all questioning and ensuring the individual is fully informed of their Miranda rights before any further interrogation can occur. This approach prioritizes constitutional rights and ensures that any statements obtained are voluntary and admissible. Specifically, upon encountering an individual who is in custody and subject to interrogation, an officer must read them their Miranda rights. If the individual indicates in any manner, at any time prior to or during questioning, that they wish to remain silent, the interrogation must cease. If the individual indicates they wish to speak to an attorney, the interrogation must cease until an attorney is present. This aligns with the fundamental principles of due process and the exclusionary rule, which prevents the use of illegally obtained evidence. An approach that continues questioning after an individual expresses a desire to remain silent is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and the procedural safeguards mandated by Miranda. This constitutes a failure to respect the individual's constitutional rights and risks rendering any subsequent statements inadmissible in court, potentially jeopardizing the case. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to proceed with questioning without first informing the individual of their Miranda rights when they are in custody and subject to interrogation. This is a clear violation of established legal precedent and deprives the individual of their fundamental right to know they do not have to speak and have the right to legal counsel. A third professionally unacceptable approach is to interpret a vague or ambiguous statement as a waiver of rights. The law requires a clear and knowing waiver of Miranda rights. Any ambiguity should be resolved in favor of the individual's rights, meaning further clarification or cessation of questioning is required. The professional reasoning process for officers in such situations should involve a clear checklist. Is the individual in custody? Is the individual being interrogated? If both are true, have Miranda rights been read and understood? If the individual invokes their right to silence or counsel, all questioning must cease immediately. If there is any doubt about the voluntariness or admissibility of a statement, it is always best practice to err on the side of caution and ensure all legal and ethical protocols are strictly followed. Question 10. The monitoring system demonstrates a significant increase in overtime hours for patrol officers in the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD, over the past quarter. The CPD's standard overtime pay rate is 1.5 times the officer's base hourly wage. If the average base hourly wage for a patrol officer is $28.50, and the system indicates an average of 15 overtime hours per officer during this period. With 200 patrol officers employed, what is the total estimated overtime cost for patrol officers during this quarter? Option A, $380,000. Option B, $128,250. Option C, $190,000. Option D, $256,500. The correct answer is D, $256,500. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a critical need for accurate resource allocation and deployment, particularly in a high-stakes environment like law enforcement in Columbus, Ohio. The challenge lies in interpreting raw data and translating it into actionable intelligence that aligns with departmental policies and operational needs, while also adhering to budgetary constraints. Misinterpreting this data can lead to inefficient use of personnel, potentially compromising public safety, or leading to unnecessary expenditure. The best approach involves a systematic calculation of overtime costs based on actual hours worked and the established overtime pay rate, ensuring compliance with Columbus Division of Police, CPD, overtime policies, and Ohio Revised Code regarding public employee compensation. This method directly addresses the financial implications of the observed overtime, allowing for informed decisions regarding staffing and future budget planning. It prioritizes accuracy and adherence to established financial regulations, which is paramount for responsible public service. An incorrect approach would be to simply estimate the overtime cost based on a rough observation of the data. This lacks the precision required for financial accountability and could lead to significant under- or overestimation of expenses. It fails to adhere to the principle of accurate record-keeping and financial diligence expected of CPD. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the number of overtime hours without considering the associated financial impact. While the volume of overtime is a concern, understanding its cost is essential for budgetary control and resource management. This approach neglects the financial dimension of the problem, which is a critical component of operational efficiency. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that all overtime is automatically approved and budgeted for, without a detailed cost analysis. This overlooks the need for justification and potential review of overtime patterns, which is often a requirement for public sector spending. It bypasses the necessary financial scrutiny. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve 1. Clearly identifying the problem, excessive overtime and its cost. 2. Gathering all relevant data, hours worked, pay rates, policies. 3. Applying appropriate calculation methods to determine the financial impact. 4. Comparing the actual costs against budgetary allocations and departmental policies. 5. Formulating recommendations based on accurate data and regulatory compliance. Question 11. System analysis indicates that during a lawful traffic stop in Columbus, Ohio, an officer observes no overt signs of criminal activity, but develops a subjective feeling that the driver might be concealing something in the vehicle. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officer to take regarding a potential search of the vehicle? Option A. Immediately order the driver out of the vehicle and conduct a search based on the officer's subjective feeling. Option B. Politely inform the driver of the reason for the stop and request their voluntary consent to search the vehicle. Option C. Threaten to impound the vehicle or issue multiple citations to pressure the driver into consenting to a search. Option D. Detain the driver for an extended period without further articulable suspicion while waiting for a K-9 unit to arrive. The correct answer is B. Politely inform the driver of the reason for the stop and request their voluntary consent to search the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Columbus, Division of Police (CPD) officer by requiring them to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual during a traffic stop. The officer must exercise careful judgment to ensure their actions are lawful, ethical, and adhere to the specific procedural guidelines governing police interactions in Ohio. The potential for misinterpretation of intent or overreach of authority necessitates a measured and legally sound approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly and politely informing the individual of the reason for the stop and requesting consent to search their vehicle. This approach is correct because it respects the individual's Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Ohio law and relevant U.S. Supreme Court precedent. By seeking consent, the officer obtains voluntary permission, thereby establishing a lawful basis for the search without needing probable cause or reasonable suspicion for the search itself, though reasonable suspicion for the initial stop is presumed. This method upholds transparency and builds trust, while ensuring the search is legally defensible. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer immediately ordering the individual out of the vehicle and conducting a search based solely on a hunch or a vague feeling of unease. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the Fourth Amendment by lacking the necessary probable cause or reasonable suspicion to justify a warrantless search. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found and disciplinary action against the officer. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to detain the individual for an extended period without articulating a clear and evolving basis for suspicion, while waiting for a K-9 unit to arrive. While prolonged detention can be permissible under certain circumstances, doing so without a continuously developing reasonable suspicion or probable cause can constitute an unlawful seizure. This approach risks exceeding the scope of the initial lawful stop and infringing upon the individual's rights. A further incorrect approach would be for the officer to use the threat of impounding the vehicle or issuing numerous citations as leverage to coerce consent for a search. This constitutes an improper use of authority and can render any subsequently obtained consent involuntary, thereby invalidating the search under the Fourth Amendment. This tactic erodes public trust and is ethically unsound. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Clearly articulating the legal basis for any stop or detention. 2. Understanding and respecting individual rights, particularly those protected by the Fourth Amendment. 3. Seeking voluntary consent for searches when probable cause or reasonable suspicion for a search is lacking. 4. Documenting all interactions and justifications thoroughly. 5. Continuously assessing the evolving circumstances of a stop to ensure continued legal justification for any actions taken. Question 12. The control framework reveals that Officer Miller, responding to a suspicious vehicle parked in a dimly lit alley in Columbus, Ohio, observes an individual in the driver's seat appearing to conceal something under their seat. The individual makes furtive movements. Officer Miller is alone and has not yet exited his patrol vehicle. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Officer Miller should remain in his vehicle, observe the individual's actions, and wait for the individual to exit the vehicle before taking further action. Option B. Officer Miller should immediately exit his vehicle and approach the driver's side window to verbally engage the individual and assess the situation directly. Option C. Officer Miller should immediately attempt to block the vehicle's exit from the alley with his patrol car and then exit to confront the individual. Option D. Officer Miller should immediately activate his emergency lights, exit his vehicle cautiously, and verbally command the individual to show their hands while simultaneously requesting backup via radio. The correct answer is D. Officer Miller should immediately activate his emergency lights, exit his vehicle cautiously, and verbally command the individual to show their hands while simultaneously requesting backup via radio. Explanation. The control framework reveals the importance of structured decision-making, especially in law enforcement where actions have significant consequences. This scenario is professionally challenging because Officer Miller faces a situation with conflicting information and potential risks, requiring a judgment call that balances immediate safety with adherence to established protocols. The pressure of a rapidly evolving situation can lead to hasty decisions. The best approach involves Officer Miller immediately securing the scene and requesting backup, prioritizing the safety of himself, the public, and any potential victims. This aligns with fundamental police training and the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD, operational guidelines which emphasize officer safety and the need for adequate resources when confronting potentially dangerous situations. By securing the perimeter and calling for additional units, Officer Miller creates a controlled environment, allowing for a more thorough and safer assessment of the threat and a coordinated response. This proactive measure prevents escalation and ensures that the response is handled by a sufficient number of trained personnel. Failing to immediately secure the scene and request backup, instead opting to investigate alone, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This approach disregards the CPD's emphasis on officer safety and the principle of not confronting potentially armed individuals without adequate support. It exposes Officer Miller to undue risk and could lead to a compromised investigation or a dangerous confrontation. Similarly, approaching the vehicle without backup, even with the intention of de-escalation, bypasses crucial safety protocols. While de-escalation is a vital skill, it should be employed within a framework that ensures officer safety and operational effectiveness, which in this context necessitates backup. This approach risks a volatile encounter where Officer Miller is outnumbered and outgunned, potentially leading to injury or worse. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, follows established protocols, and utilizes available resources. This involves a rapid assessment of the situation, identifying immediate threats, and then acting to mitigate those threats while adhering to departmental policy. The framework should encourage seeking assistance when the situation exceeds an individual officer's capacity or poses an unacceptable risk. Question 13. During the evaluation of a potential drug-related incident at a residence in Columbus, Ohio, an officer observes an individual inside who appears to be attempting to flush a small baggie down a toilet. The officer has prior intelligence suggesting drug activity at this location and believes the baggie contains narcotics. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Secure the individual and the immediate area to prevent further destruction of evidence, and then immediately begin the process of obtaining a search warrant for the residence. Option B. Leave the scene to gather more intelligence before taking any action. Option C. Enter the residence without a warrant and seize the baggie to preserve it as evidence. Option D. Allow the individual to flush the baggie and then question them about the incident. Correct answer is A. Secure the individual and the immediate area to prevent further destruction of evidence, and then immediately begin the process of obtaining a search warrant for the residence. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with the legal rights of an individual and the procedural requirements of law enforcement. The officer must make a rapid assessment of a dynamic situation, considering potential threats while adhering to the established legal framework governing searches and seizures in Ohio. The core tension lies in the potential for evidence destruction versus the need for probable cause and a warrant. The correct approach involves prioritizing the preservation of potential evidence while initiating the legal process for obtaining a warrant. This means securing the scene and the individual to prevent further tampering or destruction of evidence, and then promptly seeking judicial authorization for a search. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and generally requires a warrant based on probable cause. The Ohio Revised Code and relevant case law further define the parameters of probable cause and the exceptions to the warrant requirement. By securing the scene and the individual, the officer is acting to prevent imminent destruction of evidence, which can be a factor in exigent circumstances. But the ultimate search must be authorized by a warrant unless a specific, recognized exception applies. This approach respects individual rights while diligently pursuing law enforcement objectives. An incorrect approach would be to immediately search the individual or the premises without a warrant, even with a suspicion of evidence destruction. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement and Ohio's statutory protections against unreasonable searches. Another incorrect approach would be to allow the individual to leave the scene or dispose of potential evidence without taking immediate steps to secure it or initiate the warrant process. This demonstrates a failure to act diligently to preserve evidence and uphold the integrity of a potential investigation. Finally, an approach that involves delaying the warrant application process unnecessarily after securing the scene would also be professionally deficient, as it could allow for the evidence to degrade or be moved, and it fails to move the investigation forward efficiently within legal bounds. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a rapid assessment of the situation, identifying potential threats and the presence of evidence. This assessment should then be weighed against established legal principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment and relevant state laws. If probable cause exists, the next step is to determine if exigent circumstances justify immediate action or if a warrant is required. The officer must then take appropriate steps to preserve the scene and any potential evidence while initiating the legal process to obtain a warrant. Documentation of all observations and actions is crucial throughout this process. Question 14. What factors determine the appropriate level of police intervention when an officer observes a vehicle parked in a restricted zone in Columbus, Ohio, with occupants exhibiting furtive movements? Option A. The officer's decision to approach the vehicle aggressively and order the occupants out without any articulable suspicion, based on the assumption that any vehicle in a restricted zone with furtive movements is inherently involved in criminal activity. Option B. The officer's personal feeling that the occupants are suspicious, regardless of concrete observable facts, leading to an immediate demand for identification and search of the vehicle. Option C. The officer's immediate radioing for backup and waiting for a supervisor to arrive before making any assessment or approach, even if the situation appears to be escalating or poses an immediate risk. Option D. The officer's ability to articulate specific, observable facts that suggest criminal activity or a threat to public safety, justifying a lawful stop and investigation according to Ohio Revised Code and CPD policy. The correct answer is D. The officer's ability to articulate specific, observable facts that suggest criminal activity or a threat to public safety, justifying a lawful stop and investigation according to Ohio Revised Code and CPD policy. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for Columbus, Division of Police, CPD officers, balancing immediate public safety concerns with the need for thorough, lawful investigation. The officer's decision-making framework must align with Ohio Revised Code (ORC) and CPD policy, particularly concerning probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and the preservation of evidence. The best approach involves a measured response that prioritizes officer safety and evidence integrity while adhering to legal standards. This means securing the scene, assessing the immediate threat, and initiating a lawful investigation based on observed facts. The officer must articulate specific, articulable facts that lead to a reasonable belief that a crime has occurred or is about to occur, or that evidence is present. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Ohio courts. The officer's actions must be justifiable based on the totality of the circumstances known at the time. An incorrect approach would be to act solely on a hunch or a vague tip, without any corroborating evidence, leading to a potential violation of an individual's rights and rendering any subsequent evidence inadmissible. Another incorrect approach is to delay necessary action to the point where evidence is compromised or a public safety threat escalates, demonstrating a failure to exercise sound judgment under pressure. Acting with excessive force or without a clear legal basis for detention or search also constitutes a significant ethical and legal failure, undermining public trust and departmental integrity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that includes 1. Immediate threat assessment and officer safety. 2. Identification of observable facts and articulable suspicion or probable cause. 3. Consideration of relevant CPD policies and ORC provisions. 4. Documentation of all observations and actions. 5. Consultation with supervisors when uncertainty exists. This structured approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and contribute to effective law enforcement. Question 15. Market research demonstrates that officers of the Columbus, Division of Police (CPD) frequently encounter situations requiring immediate judgment calls. Imagine you are on patrol in Columbus, Ohio, and you receive a dispatch call regarding a possible burglary in progress at a residential address. Upon arrival, you observe an individual matching the suspect's description, attempting to exit the rear of the property, carrying a bag that appears to contain stolen items. The individual does not appear to be armed, and there is no immediate indication of anyone else being present or in danger within the residence. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Allow the individual to leave the property with the bag to avoid a confrontation, and then attempt to locate them later for questioning. Option B. Secure the individual and the bag, immediately notify a supervisor, and await further instructions or specialized unit assistance while maintaining observation of the property. Option C. Immediately enter the residence to search for other potential suspects or victims without obtaining a warrant or further authorization. Option D. Detain the individual and the bag, and then conduct a thorough search of the bag on the spot to inventory its contents before contacting a supervisor. The correct answer is B. Secure the individual and the bag, immediately notify a supervisor, and await further instructions or specialized unit assistance while maintaining observation of the property. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that effective decision-making under pressure is a critical competency for Columbus O Division of Police, CPD, officers. This scenario presents a common challenge where an officer must balance immediate public safety concerns with established departmental policy and legal protocols. The professional challenge lies in the potential for conflicting priorities and the need for swift, yet legally sound, action. A misstep can lead to compromised evidence, legal challenges, or harm to individuals involved. The best approach involves prioritizing immediate safety, while initiating a documented process that respects individual rights and departmental procedures. This means securing the scene and any immediate threats to public safety, then immediately contacting a supervisor and requesting appropriate specialized units, like a K-9 or SWAT if the situation escalates, while ensuring all actions are consistent with CPD policy and Ohio Revised Code regarding search and seizure. This approach is correct because it adheres to the fundamental principle of officer safety and public protection, while simultaneously respecting the legal framework governing police actions and ensuring proper oversight and accountability through supervisor notification and the initiation of formal procedures. It prevents hasty decisions that could jeopardize an investigation or violate constitutional rights. An incorrect approach would be to immediately enter the property without further authorization or a warrant, based solely on the suspicion of illegal activity. This fails to adhere to the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Ohio law, which generally require probable cause and a warrant for searches of private residences, unless specific exigent circumstances are present and clearly documented. Another incorrect approach would be to delay any action, allowing a potential suspect to escape or evidence to be destroyed, due to an overemphasis on obtaining a warrant when immediate safety concerns might warrant a different course of action, or failing to notify a supervisor, thereby bypassing established chain of command and oversight. A further incorrect approach would be to engage in a prolonged, informal interrogation of the individual outside the property without proper Miranda warnings, which could render any statements inadmissible in court. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate threat to life and safety. If no immediate threat exists, the next step is to gather as much information as possible to establish probable cause. This information should then be used to determine the appropriate legal and policy-driven course of action, which typically involves seeking supervisory approval and, if necessary, obtaining a warrant. Throughout this process, officers must remain mindful of constitutional rights and departmental procedures, documenting all actions and observations meticulously. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that effective law enforcement in Columbus, Ohio, requires officers to make swift and legally sound decisions in dynamic situations. Imagine an officer responding to a credible tip about a suspect involved in drug trafficking who is believed to be inside a residence, potentially destroying evidence. The officer has observed the suspect briefly through a window, confirming their presence, but does not have a warrant. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take immediately? Option A. Immediately enter the residence without a warrant to search for and seize any evidence of drug trafficking, based on the tip and the brief observation of the suspect. Option B. Wait outside the residence for a prolonged period, hoping the suspect will exit voluntarily to avoid any potential legal challenges to a search. Option C. Secure the perimeter of the residence to prevent the suspect from fleeing and immediately contact a supervisor and seek a warrant from a judge, while observing for any signs of evidence destruction that might justify immediate limited entry under exigent circumstances. Option D. Approach the front door and verbally demand entry, stating the officer has reason to believe evidence is being destroyed, and enter if the suspect opens the door. The correct answer is C. Secure the perimeter of the residence to prevent the suspect from fleeing and immediately contact a supervisor and seek a warrant from a judge, while observing for any signs of evidence destruction that might justify immediate limited entry under exigent circumstances. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Columbus, Ohio, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights. The officer must make a rapid decision that could impact an ongoing investigation and the potential for apprehending a suspect, while simultaneously adhering to the strictures of the Fourth Amendment and Ohio law regarding searches and seizures. The pressure of a potential escape or destruction of evidence adds to the complexity, demanding a decision-making process grounded in established legal principles and departmental policy. The best approach involves a structured, legally sound method of gathering information and securing evidence. This begins with establishing probable cause, which is the cornerstone of lawful searches and arrests under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Ohio courts. Once probable cause is established, the officer can then seek a warrant or, if exigent circumstances are present and clearly documented, proceed with a warrantless search incident to arrest or a protective sweep. This methodical process ensures that any subsequent actions are defensible and respect the rights of the individual. The Columbus Division of Police, CPD training emphasizes adherence to these constitutional mandates and departmental procedures for evidence collection. An incorrect approach would be to rely on mere suspicion or a hunch to justify a search. Suspicion, while it may prompt further investigation, does not rise to the level of probable cause required by the Fourth Amendment for a search or arrest. Acting solely on suspicion would violate the individual's Fourth Amendment rights and could lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained, jeopardizing the case. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a full search of the premises without a warrant or clear exigent circumstances, even if the officer has a strong belief that evidence is present. This bypasses the judicial oversight intended by the warrant requirement and is a direct violation of constitutional protections against unreasonable searches. Finally, delaying the investigation to the point where evidence could be lost or a suspect could escape without having taken legally permissible steps to secure the situation demonstrates poor judgment and a failure to act decisively within legal boundaries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Assessing the situation to identify potential legal violations and immediate threats. 2. Gathering objective facts to establish probable cause or reasonable suspicion as appropriate for the intended action. 3. Consulting departmental policy and relevant case law. 4. Considering the least intrusive means to achieve investigative goals. And 5. Documenting all actions and the rationale behind them meticulously. In situations involving potential evidence, the framework dictates seeking a warrant whenever feasible, or clearly articulating the exigent circumstances that justify a warrantless action. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that effective law enforcement in Columbus, Ohio, relies heavily on adherence to constitutional rights and departmental protocols. An officer receives an anonymous tip alleging a specific individual is selling illegal narcotics from their residence. The tip provides a detailed description of the individual and their vehicle and suggests a specific time frame for the alleged activity. The officer has no prior knowledge of the individual or the residence, and the informant's reliability is unknown. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Immediately approach the residence and attempt to gain consent to search the premises based on the received tip. Option B. Detain the individual if they are observed near the residence and question them extensively about the allegations. Option C. Attempt to corroborate the informant's tip through independent observation and surveillance, and if sufficient corroboration is obtained, seek a search warrant from a judge. Option D. Conduct a warrantless search of the residence based on the detailed information provided by the anonymous tip. The correct answer is C. Attempt to corroborate the informant's tip through independent observation and surveillance, and if sufficient corroboration is obtained, seek a search warrant from a judge. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that public trust in law enforcement is paramount for effective community policing in Columbus, Ohio. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of individuals and the established procedures of the Columbus, Division of Police, CPD. A hasty or uninformed decision could lead to legal repercussions, damage community relations, and compromise the integrity of an investigation. The best approach involves a thorough understanding and application of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Ohio law and CPD policy regarding searches and seizures. This means officers must have probable cause, a warrant, or a recognized exception to the warrant requirement before conducting a search. In this situation, the officer should prioritize obtaining a warrant based on the gathered intelligence, which would provide legal authorization and a clear framework for the search, thereby protecting the rights of the individual and ensuring the admissibility of any evidence obtained. This aligns with the fundamental principle that searches must be reasonable and conducted under legal authority. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a search based solely on the informant's tip without further corroboration or attempting to secure a warrant. This disregards the requirement for probable cause, which is a cornerstone of Fourth Amendment protections. Relying on unverified information from an informant, without independent verification of the informant's reliability or the accuracy of the information, could lead to an unlawful search and seizure, violating constitutional rights and potentially rendering any seized evidence inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the individual for an extended period without sufficient legal justification, hoping they might consent to a search or reveal incriminating information. While brief investigatory stops, Terry stops, are permissible under specific circumstances, reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, prolonged detention without probable cause or arrest is unlawful. This approach risks violating the individual's rights against unreasonable seizure and could lead to civil liability for the officer and the CPD. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to pressure the individual into consenting to a search. While consent can be a valid exception to the warrant requirement, it must be freely and voluntarily given, without coercion or duress. If consent is obtained under duress or as a result of an unlawful detention, it is not considered valid, and any evidence found would likely be suppressed. This undermines the principles of voluntary cooperation and can create a perception of abuse of authority. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the available information against established legal standards and departmental policies. Officers should always consider the constitutional rights of individuals, the requirements for probable cause and reasonable suspicion, and the proper procedures for obtaining warrants or invoking exceptions. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or legal advisor is a critical step to ensure lawful and ethical conduct. Question 18. The evaluation methodology shows that when an officer of the Columbus, Division of Police observes an individual loitering in a dimly lit alley known for recent drug activity, exhibiting furtive movements and attempting to conceal an object in their waistband, what is the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Begin shouting commands and demanding the individual empty their pockets immediately to ensure officer safety. Option B. Approach the individual cautiously, verbally announce the officer's presence and intent to investigate, observe the individual's behavior and surroundings for immediate threats, and if reasonable suspicion of criminal activity is established, articulate the specific reasons for a potential pat-down for weapons. Option C. Immediately attempt to physically detain the individual and conduct a full search of their person and belongings due to the high-risk location and suspicious behavior. Option D. Ignore the individual as they are not actively engaged in a crime and focus on other patrol duties. The correct answer is B. Approach the individual cautiously, verbally announce the officer's presence and intent to investigate, observe the individual's behavior and surroundings for immediate threats, and if reasonable suspicion of criminal activity is established, articulate the specific reasons for a potential pat-down for weapons. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that effective decision-making in law enforcement requires a structured approach, especially when faced with ambiguous or rapidly evolving situations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands an immediate response that balances the need for public safety with the rights of individuals, all while operating within the specific legal and policy framework of Columbus, Ohio. The officer must quickly assess the situation, consider potential risks, and act in a manner that is both lawful and ethically sound, avoiding actions that could be misconstrued or lead to negative consequences for the individual or the department. The best approach involves a systematic assessment of the situation, prioritizing de-escalation and information gathering before resorting to more forceful measures. This means approaching the individual calmly, clearly stating the reason for the interaction, and observing their behavior and surroundings for any immediate threats. The officer should then attempt to obtain consent for a pat-down if reasonable suspicion of criminal activity exists, explaining the basis for this suspicion. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring probable cause or reasonable suspicion for stops and searches. It also adheres to Columbus Division of Police, CPD, policies that emphasize community policing principles, de-escalation techniques, and the importance of respecting individual rights. By gathering information and seeking consent, the officer minimizes the risk of an unlawful stop or search and builds trust with the community. An approach that immediately attempts a pat-down without articulating specific, articulable facts to justify reasonable suspicion is procedurally flawed. This would violate the Fourth Amendment, as it constitutes an unreasonable search. Furthermore, it disregards CPD policy that mandates a lawful basis for any search, potentially leading to disciplinary action and civil liability. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation entirely, as this could be seen as dereliction of duty if there is a genuine concern for public safety or a violation of law occurring. This fails to uphold the officer's responsibility to investigate suspicious activity and maintain order. Finally, an approach that involves aggressive questioning or intimidation without a clear legal basis for the stop is also problematic. This can escalate the situation unnecessarily, erode community trust, and potentially lead to accusations of profiling or harassment, which are contrary to CPD's commitment to fair and impartial policing. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with situational awareness and threat assessment. This is followed by identifying legal parameters and departmental policies governing the interaction. Next, officers should consider de-escalation strategies and communication techniques. If a stop or search is contemplated, the officer must be able to articulate specific, objective facts that establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause. The decision to proceed with any action should be based on a thorough evaluation of these factors, always prioritizing lawful conduct, respect for individual rights, and the safety of all involved. Question 19. Compliance review shows that Columbus O. Division of Police officer is investigating a serious crime and believes a suspect's personal cell phone, which is in police custody, contains critical evidence. The officer is considering accessing the phone's contents without the suspect's explicit consent or a warrant, arguing that the investigation is time-sensitive. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take in Columbus, Ohio? Option A. Wait for the suspect to request access to their phone, at which point the officer can then attempt to negotiate access. Option B. Attempt to persuade the suspect to voluntarily unlock and provide access to the phone, implying that cooperation will be viewed favorably. Option C. Access the cell phone's contents immediately, as the investigation is time-sensitive and the phone is in police custody. Option D. Obtain a warrant from a judge to search the cell phone's contents. The correct answer is D. Obtain a warrant from a judge to search the cell phone's contents. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between departmental policy, the immediate need for information, and the rights of an individual. Officers must balance their duty to investigate with the legal and ethical obligations to respect privacy and due process. The pressure of an ongoing investigation can lead to hasty decisions that may have significant legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to established departmental policy and legal guidelines regarding evidence collection and individual rights. This approach prioritizes lawful procedures, ensuring that any information obtained is admissible and that the individual's rights are protected. Specifically, it requires obtaining consent or a warrant before accessing private digital information, aligning with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Ohio law concerning search and seizure. This method upholds the integrity of the investigation and the credibility of the Columbus Division of Police. Incorrect approach is analysis. Accessing the phone without consent or a warrant, even with the belief that it might contain crucial evidence, constitutes a violation of the individual's privacy rights and is likely illegal under Ohio and federal law. This bypasses due process and could lead to the exclusion of evidence, jeopardizing the entire investigation. Attempting to coerce consent from the individual under duress or implied threat is unethical and legally problematic. True consent must be voluntary and informed, and any indication of coercion renders it invalid. This approach undermines the principles of fairness and can lead to legal challenges against the department. Delaying the investigation to pursue a warrant when there is a clear and immediate need for information, and the circumstances do not meet the criteria for an exception to the warrant requirement, like exigent circumstances, could be seen as a failure to act diligently. However, in this specific scenario, the primary failure is the potential violation of rights by accessing the phone without proper authorization, making the pursuit of a warrant the correct, albeit potentially time-consuming, path. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue, accessing digital evidence. 2. Consulting relevant policies and laws. Columbus Division of Police Policy on Digital Evidence and Ohio/U.S. Constitutional Law regarding search and seizure. 3. Evaluating options against legal and ethical standards. Does the proposed action violate privacy rights or departmental procedures? 4. Selecting the lawful and ethical course of action, obtaining consent or a warrant. 5. Documenting the decision-making process, recording the steps taken and the rationale behind them. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that effective resource allocation is critical for public safety. The Columbus Division of Police (CPD) is preparing its annual budget request. A senior officer proposes allocating funds based primarily on the previous year's expenditure, arguing it's the most straightforward method. Another suggestion is to prioritize requests from units that have historically received more attention or have more vocal leadership. A third perspective suggests focusing on immediate, high-profile crime suppression efforts, even if it means diverting funds from preventative programs. Considering the CPD's mandate and the principles of responsible public service, what is the most effective and ethically sound approach to budget allocation? Option A. Reallocate funds to focus exclusively on immediate, high-visibility crime suppression initiatives, even if it means significantly reducing investment in long-term crime prevention programs and community outreach. Option B. Allocate funds based on historical spending patterns from the previous fiscal year, with minor adjustments for inflation, as this represents a stable and predictable method of resource distribution. Option C. Prioritize budget requests from divisions or units whose commanding officers have demonstrated strong advocacy and have historically secured larger portions of the budget, ensuring their operational needs are met. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of current crime trends, call volume, response times, and personnel deployment across all CPD divisions, projecting future needs based on demographic data and community feedback, to justify a budget request that strategically allocates resources to address identified priorities and critical service gaps. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of current crime trends, call volume, response times, and personnel deployment across all CPD divisions, projecting future needs based on demographic data and community feedback, to justify a budget request that strategically allocates resources to address identified priorities and critical service gaps. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that effective resource allocation is crucial for public safety operations. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement agencies, balancing immediate needs with long-term strategic planning under budgetary constraints. The Columbus Division of Police (CPD) operates within the framework of Ohio Revised Code and municipal ordinances, which mandate responsible fiscal management and equitable service delivery. The most professionally sound approach involves a data-driven assessment of current operational needs against available resources, followed by a strategic allocation that prioritizes critical functions and addresses identified gaps. This aligns with principles of efficient public service and accountability. Specifically, It requires a thorough analysis of crime statistics, call volume, response times, and personnel deployment patterns within Columbus. The CPD must then project future needs based on demographic trends and anticipated challenges. This data then informs a budget request that is justified by demonstrable needs and aligned with departmental objectives. The process should also involve consultation with precinct commanders and subject matter experts to ensure practical feasibility and buy-in. This methodical, evidence-based approach ensures that resources are deployed where they will have the greatest impact on public safety, and that the CPD can effectively meet its mandate. An approach that focuses solely on historical spending patterns without considering current operational realities or future projections is flawed. While past budgets offer a baseline, they do not account for evolving crime trends, new technological requirements, or shifts in community needs. This can lead to underfunding critical areas or overspending on less impactful initiatives, ultimately compromising public safety and efficient resource utilization. Another less effective approach would be to prioritize requests based on the perceived influence of the requesting officer or unit, rather than objective need. This can lead to an inequitable distribution of resources, favoring certain areas or functions over others, and can foster an environment of favoritism rather than merit. Such a practice undermines the principles of fairness and transparency expected of a public service agency. Furthermore, an approach that relies on ad hoc adjustments or reactive measures without a comprehensive strategic plan is inefficient and unsustainable. This can result in a constant state of crisis management, where resources are shifted hastily to address immediate problems, often at the expense of planned initiatives or preventative measures. This reactive stance prevents the CPD from proactively addressing systemic issues and achieving long-term improvements in public safety. The professional decision-making framework for resource allocation should involve a continuous cycle of assessment, planning, implementation, and evaluation. This includes 1. Data collection and analysis, gathering and interpreting relevant data on crime, calls for service, personnel, and equipment. 2. Needs assessment, identifying current and future operational requirements based on the data. 3. Strategic planning, developing a clear plan that outlines how resources will be used to achieve departmental goals. 4. Budget development and justification, creating a budget that reflects the strategic plan and providing clear justification for all expenditures. 5. Stakeholder consultation, engaging with internal and external stakeholders to gather input and build consensus. 6. Performance monitoring and evaluation, regularly assessing the effectiveness of resource allocation and making adjustments as needed.